What a lark! Right, friends.
I, in turn, am delighted to welcome all of you to the symposium. It promises to be a rich and diverse range of speakers today, presentations and performances on and around the themes of disability arts, diversity and activism. It seems appropriate. It seems an appropriate moment to come together to discuss these issues, for at the very moment we are celebrating the achievements and high profile of deaf and disabled artists in the Arts Council England's Unlimited Arts Programme, which was at the heart of the Cultural Olympiad last summer, we are simultaneously facing the momentous changes to benefit and welfare and the challenges of cuts to funding across the arts and cultural sector. So, current practice. As a multimedia installation and performance artist, I have developed a socially engaged, relationally practice that uses theoretical frames to distill and communicate the understandings generated by an artistic practice that engages with the experience of disability. This has resulted in me developing Freewheeling with Trish Wheatley, and Freewheeling is an emerging disability-led initiative focused on providing a hub around which to foster integrated arts practice, allowing ideas and artistic concepts to develop while maintaining an emphasis on promoting academic research that aims to reposition disability art and the status of disabled artists within the mainstream cultural sector. I'm developing a model for artistic practice within Freewheeling that recognises the power of starting at the personal and then finding archetypal images and numinous images that communicate through connecting with the universality of all human experience. I have just reenacted the painting of the white lines that took place at Holton Lee for my first solo exhibition there, and also in Plymouth that caused a great debate there where they just appeared overnight. But here there's been a little bit more planning and we had a brilliant reaction today. During the setting up of this exhibition, but I'm here as Director of Disability Arts Online. So just a bit about DAO. DAO is a showcasing opportunity. It's a supportive network, a platform for debate, and a news and listings service that combined provides the world's largest online collection of information about arts and culture from a disability perspective. Our current Arts Council funded project is Diverse Perspectives, and that gave the spark that ignited the idea for the exhibition that you're able to see here today. The idea behind the Diverse Perspectives project is that we facilitate commissions and residencies with host organisations so that they're supported in working with disabled artists. In the initial conversations about Ginny's commission here at the Arts Centre, it became clear that the ambitions for this work from the artist and the venue were much bigger than the commission alone. So with Link Up Arts, which is based here at the Arts Centre, Lua took the lead and we began to shape up a project and apply for Arts Council funding to exhibit and celebrate Ginny's commission with the work of two other Link Up Artists Network members, Liz Crow and Sue Austin. So the results are what you see here today. I'm sure the creative case for diversity will crop up at some point in the conversations today, and I just wanted to share a quick thought with you on in relation to the People Like You exhibition. I'm currently making my way through a book called Future Perfect by Stephen Johnston, in which he explores the idea of peer progressive networks, and in referring to diversity, he says,
When groups are exposed to a more diverse range of perspectives, when their values are forced to confront different viewpoints, they are likely to approach the world in a more nuanced way. I think that really supports the creative case. So this is an invitation to you to look deep into the artworks and their concepts, to discover through their personal and diverse perspectives some more universally applicable approaches to the world.
Spines, virtual spines, prickle and stir, raise themselves up from nowhere like the frame of a crook house being hoisted from the earth. The strangest stranger to gravity, indeterminate, seated, wheelless and wired. Fons 2 holds a conversation with reality, appeals with an alien perspective to the unconstructed alternatives that facilitate a lighter take. Wheelborne, I seldom interact with playful geography. Confined by the history and imagination of architect and planner, I roll oppressed by the hierarchy of power, the constant reminder of status in flights of elegant stairways. You have to wonder if being normal is disadvantageous enough to drive apparent normals to exhibit their most bizarre natures in order to satisfy the accepted need for artists to be damaged people. So I can't help speculating about why disabled people don't rate higher.
The first thing I wanted to do was to talk about personal. And for me, the personal can be absolutely what Sue was talking about earlier on. But it can also be, the personal can also be quite tedious, quite inward-looking, quite boring, very specific to just oneself, and it doesn't necessarily communicate to anyone else. But of course it can communicate to other people, the personal. It can touch a wider nerve. And, you know, I think there is a distinction to be made between different types of the personal, because the personal can just be about you. It doesn't necessarily communicate to anyone else. And when we talk about the other end of the journey, universal, of course the universal is a very contested notion today, in today's world. I mean, as a Muslim, the universal seems to be today to be caught up in this notion of selective Western values, a kind of misreading of the Enlightenment philosophers, which is too often used to bash the Muslim world, for example. So, you know, both the personal and universal, I think sometimes we need to test out what we mean by those particular concepts. Firstly, I think you have to have a transformative agenda around activism and art. I don't think it can be the notion of just accretion. I know from my experience, for example, that there has been legislation around race relations since 1968. Since 1968. But actually, if you look at the position, for example, of young black men and women in London today, a full 50%, 1 in 2 are unemployed. So although you've had legislation around race for nearly 50 years, actually structurally, there are still huge problems to surmount. So I do believe, actually, any agenda has to be transformational. Secondly, I think you have to have self-determination and you have to have independence. And independence of thought and independence of action. And you have to dictate what it is that you're trying to do, rather than relying on others to do it. You kind of know that. I'll end on this. What we can't have is actually a process of assimilation. That seems to me a process by which you lose the uniqueness of the work which we're seeing demonstrated today. And we have to be careful that we don't go down that path of assimilation, where actually what is unique and is a gift to the whole of humanity somehow gets lost along the way. And I'll give you one example of, no, I'll give you 2 examples of that. One is the artist Rachel Gadsden. Does anyone know Rachel Gadsden? I've had she's a visual artist. She paints huge portraits and works of art very, very quickly, broad brushstrokes, extremely quickly, right? What you have to understand about Rachel is in terms of her impairment, is she doesn't know whether she's going to be alive from 1 minute to the next. And when you see her paint her portraits, you'll see one on the postcard for the Creative Case today, you'll see actually her urgency and the question of mortality is really embedded in her work. Now, the question of mortality is a question for Rachel, but it's a question for everybody, it seems to me. And actually, what's special about Rachel actually stems from that particular circumstance that she finds herself in. It speaks through her, but it speaks to everyone.
I mean, I was an artist, and I was trained at the Slade, and I had a sort of career of some level. In my late 20s, I had a breakdown, and I felt very disillusioned with the art world, its values, and its power base as well, at some level. And I started working in the day centre for adults with learning disabilities. I was there as a volunteer. My first project was to work with a group of 12 learning disabled artists to run a series of workshops. With my background and my passion about art, I immediately became aware that amongst these group of people there were some fantastically creative individuals. I organised an exhibition at a library in Brighton, and I went back at the end of my 12 weeks to collect the work and asked the art instructors for it, to be told that it no longer existed. I said, why doesn't it exist? They said, well, we popped it. We always turned the work into paper mache because we got no way of storing it. And we didn't know what to do with it. And I never forget to this day my shock at the creative abuse and the creative neglect of that group of artists. And I was also struck by the lack of understanding or set of values that the art instructors or the staff had of the day centre about not seeing what was in front of them. And those two key messages to me have underpinned a lot of my work and my thinking around inclusion and the arts. How do you get the work of a broader set of creators to be seen and respected? But also, how do you change the mindset of society to realise there's a broader group of people making art in many different ways that also need to be seen and understood? And how do you change their values? How do you get them to entrust their sort of, how do you get them to value it? How do you create a set of values around that work?
In terms of what we've been hearing early on, I think I'm very much that every woman type person. I've been asked to talk about disabled artists as change makers. I started to use the word difference because the minute I said I worked in diversity, or even worse, if I said I worked in disability, people would actually fall asleep. There was just an automatic disconnect, an automatic dropout, with people thinking that it would be dull, worthy, boring, that it would all be about legal requirements, access, not what it's about to me, which is that it's about inspiration. It's about different perspectives, it's about challenging preconceptions and stereotypes, but not from a place of worthiness, from a place of sheer, for me, brilliance. And actually, the more people that get talking about work, the more resonance it has, the more those ripples get to extend out. And that's something I'm really interested in. How can we extend the impact of this work? And it does have an impact. When Unlimited, the commissions, came to the South Bank in London, lots of things happened. They changed the signage. There's me posing by Sue's image, which was on the big poster. They had lots of different signage. They set up big information points. They changed the signage in the building. And they kept that. They've actually kept the accessible way of providing information because it worked for more people.
So first, to give some of the background, bedding out has really come out of a dilemma that I face. In that I have lived a life of two very starkly separate paths for many, many years. There is the public self, that goes out amongst people and tries to be energetic and happening and change the world and tries to meet with social approval. And then, and people who see me behaving that way think that that represents me. But then there is the private self as well, and that's the part of me that spends most of my time at home, a lot of my time lying down, and quite a bit of my time in my bed. And nobody sees that. And I have deliberately concealed that because I learned very early on that that way of being doesn't win friends, and it doesn't win accolades, and it certainly doesn't win social approval. So I've concealed it very carefully.
I feel that what Salisbury Arts Centre has done today so successfully is bring together a number of perspectives. The artists themselves who are exhibiting here and getting a sense of how they're working as disabled artists and the issues for them around being disabled artists has opened up a number of questions. Also having people like Hassan from the Arts Council, having Mark from the gallery, their perspectives have been really useful as arts funders in setting, the agenda for the day. Issues around where power is located, who has agency, who can represent themselves, who represents the disabled artist or disabled people. All these questions have been discussed, and the forum has been really, really rich. The audience have been fantastically engaging and have really pushed the speakers on a range of issues. And we've covered so many topics. I think that the day has been a real success. The high point for me was Liz Crow's bedding out talk, where she sat in bed surrounded by panel members. And it kind of created a sort of distraction from the way we'd spent the rest of the day sitting in an auditorium, asking questions and so forth. And suddenly we were sitting in a much more informal setting, and I think that it allowed people to really think outside of the box and to welcome the way in which she made herself so vulnerable in that situation. And it just created a new conversation, and I hope it's a conversation that will carry on beyond today's symposium.